Hello, my friends. Welcome back to a brand new episode of What's Missing in Marketing Today. So this week, I'll be interviewing Ryan, who's a content strategist and also, of course, a video editor. Ryan, thank you so much for the time, and I can't wait to get in this conversation. But before we start off, what do you think is missing in marketing today, my friend?
Thanks, first of all, for the introduction. So I've been giving this one a lot of thought because that was definitely one of the questions that was kind of obvious that was going to come. Um, for me, I think it's passion. If I had to put a stamp on it, what's the one thing that is missing? I think it's passion. And what I mean by that is, I think sometimes people confuse that with authenticity. And so that is probably the loudest shout that I see on social media. It is make more authentic content. But like when you break that down and try and understand what that even means, because often I think people misconstrue that with raw content or
Yep.
unpolished content. But then there's plenty of creators who make fantastic unpolished content, and yet it gets 200 views. And then there's other creators who make extremely polished content, which is as far from authenticity as it could be, and it gets millions of views. So, like, if it was just make authentic content, that wouldn't technically then translate to any views for those creators. And so for me, I think it is passion. And I think that just means people that can tell through body language, through energy, through the things that you say, that you truly care about that thing that you make content about.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I think sometimes we use, or one could use, a lot of quote buzzwords, right? I know we were discussing before we started about you know, being authentic. What does that actually mean, right? Like, I'm so glad you mentioned it as passion because for me, it's about the energy, right? And I guess, the demands you put on yourself. I mean, like, this episode is a clear example. I feel fine. I sound like I'm dying, right?
Yeah.
But I said I would create a weekly show, and the schedule has only allowed me to do that because I'm able to consistently create and consistently put out what I believe to be value content. And I think for me, it's more about leading with what you believe to be your North Star rather than. So, because something I was going to talk to you about would be like, because some people would say, oh, but what if that video that gets 1 million views, what's it really going to do for me in regards to business, right? Because sometimes we look at it and we go, well, if it's the wrong people, then it maybe won't do anything. I
Yeah.
guess, how do you, when you work with your clients, either from a strategic point or looking at edits,
Yeah.
how do you balance that, making sure that it is the right views or the people who, are able to create something that can get good traction and it is going to be the right people so it will actually move the needle for that business as a whole?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. I think given the, let's say, the client, my predominant client base for who I make content, their approach to content is often in the need of views, right? So I think there's a certain group, especially within like the podcast space, as you know, the goal is to get lots of views because the views often then generate uh, enough traction for a company to, in essence, sponsor you. I think that's
Yeah.
the the main business model that a lot of podcast hosts try to stick to, right? There are people that I work with who don't focus on views at all, but also because they don't have sponsors, nor do they want sponsors, and instead pitch their own products. So Daniel Amen is, for example, one of those who has a massive following, and he only pitches either his own supplements, which is Brain MD, or the things that they do with their brain scan. Uh, yeah, the brain scans at their Amen clinics, and for them that delivers way more revenue than
Mm-hmm.
if they would do it in such a way that they do it with brand sponsors, because those people are already, that business model is so dependent upon trust that if people are watching the podcast, that time they spend with you, the more they engage with your content, the more they trust grows. So ultimately, it's easier for them to eventually buy when they're then ready to say, okay, I'm ready to figure out how I can improve my brain health.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of what I do with creators in advance, especially when we're in the strategic phase and setting up, I try and ask them, what is the goal? Like, how do you intend to monetize this? And when it is through brand sponsorships, for example, I understand, okay, we've got a different type of content that we need to make. We need to, for example, have way more controversial hooks. We need to have way more baity lines, because usually that drives attention and views, and people get invested. They will feel
Yeah.
the need to debate. And when that is gone and it's less there, we can focus more on value-driven videos, which is like in the case of the Amen clinics. Here are 5 things that you could do to improve your brain health today with supplements you have in your kitchen cupboard, so to speak. Um, and then the rest of these like clickbaity hooks are not gone because they still need to drive a certain amount of traffic, but they certainly become less important.
Yeah. No, I completely agree, and I think sometimes the thing that people overlook is the objective, right? The thing that they're striving towards. Because if you're just looking for views, I would argue that's a business model that works for a percentage of people, sure. But if you're looking to build trust or build authority or etc. off the back of your content, then that should, in my opinion at least, come second,
Yeah,
because you need to make sure that you're not. I'm trying to think the best way to describe it, but I guess it's twisting stuff to be a little bit too controversial, right?
yeah,
Like just for the sake of, oh, it will get, because it's a better hook, so it will get better clicks, etc. But then also, like, when you, I guess, acquire that audience, or get served to that audience, you're then more likely to be serving it to the wrong audience, because they're going to care about the maybe the drama or etc. In that
yeah,
respect, rather than the transformation that you or I could create for a business. I guess, I mean, you've had those who maybe know you through your content, etc. I mean, you've spoken quite openly on social about how good your year has been, and this is in a context for maybe longer term people who are listening, where there's a lot of people saying the creative industry is very hard right now. Being in video is very difficult, whether that's strategic, whether that's editing, whether that's production, whether that's a combination of the above. You know, how do you look at it from a perspective of maybe what should you do, and or what do you think has allowed you to stand apart when others are maybe struggling?
yeah, yeah. Great question. Um, I think first point that I'd want to say is I wouldn't I wouldn't be the type of person to tell you you should do anything. That's first of all. I've
Mm.
just done a bunch of stuff based off of what I've seen other people do. I've taken advice where I felt it was necessary. And I think where I got good is getting advice early on in my career, especially when it comes to content creation, to double down on the things that are driving results. And so early on, at some point for me, it was I need to make money now, or else I'm going to be broke, and I have a kid on the way, and I need to do something. And that was either, and I filled out the form, and I've spoken about this before. Like I had a job ready to go in a supermarket. I was 25 probably at the time, maybe 26, graduated with a master's, and here I was applying to a supermarket job to like fill the shelves. And luckily, literally the same week that I decided to do that, I ended up getting my first client, Joe Biden, who invested, who basically took me on as a part-time editor. And and because of his support and his demands, I realized I kind of found what some people refer to as their niche. And so I saw the opportunity in making more podcast trailers. I saw that podcasts were growing as a general form of media. I knew that with Diary of CEO being the leader, they will have set the standard for what you need in order to make your podcast successful. So I knew that would be more people looking for trailers. Hence, I just doubled down on that. And then kind of growing up in a hotel in Scotland, I saw in like a luxury 4-star hotel, I saw what it takes to make high quality stuff, the commitment and the dedication to it. And without tooting my own horn too much, because it's definitely what it sounds like at the moment, but like I understood that if I just cared so greatly about this each video, and not focus too much on, is my personal brand growing, am I going on enough podcasts? Like the first 2-3 years, I posted, you can track record this, there was a period in which I was posting every day on my own channels, and then at some point I just stopped because I realized, okay, I need to make money. If I need to do that, I need to become one of the best podcast trailer editors that's out there. So in order to do that, I need to put in the reps. And I had Joe as a paying client. And next to that, in the evening hours, I was just taking podcasts that were already existing, sometimes Diary of a CEO podcast. I downloaded it and just tried to replicate what they made as a trailer. And that kind of ultimately led to this point now whereby, yes, for me, it's been a tremendous year. But if you ask me, what's the hack? Just work 3 years at the thing that that people or the industry or feedback is telling you are great at, and then just produce that, and be willing that if it doesn't pay you out right away, to take that job, right? To take some side hustle, knowing that that is the kind of longer term vision to focus on.
No, I completely agree, and I think, for me personally, again, I've had like another incredible year, and I guess the moment where it changed was middle of May, when I decided that my answer to marketing was yes and, right? So yes, you should have a podcast, yes, you should have trailers, yes, you should be doing ad value content, yes, you should be doing live streaming, so on, so on, so on. And I guess the key there is, again, it comes back to that effort point we were touching on at the start, and that passion and the core. And I guess to an extent, for me, it's always been, I'm going to try and lead with my brand and show you what's possible with your marketing using my brand as an example, right?
Yeah.
Like, but also the byproduct of me doing that, of course, is I can prove to any client asking, yes, I know what I'm doing because I do this every day for me and number of clients. So I can speak in real terms rather than theoretical. And
Yeah.
I think sometimes people, wrongly or rightly, or whatever they end up having, they speak in a really good theory, especially in the space of like video production, where there's like this subculture around like, we're going to train you to be a really good video production professional, and etc. And like, I'm not trying to smoke on those people, but like, for me, it's like, if you're not in the trenches every day, what worked for you 10 years ago, or what worked for you 5 years ago, or however long ago it was, may
Yeah.
not necessarily work now. And
Yeah.
I guess to phrase that into a question, is there, like, do you see the podcast trailering space, which I know is where you kind of niche into, is that something that's going to die, or do you think that's going to just be like maybe the, I guess, the fence or the line which a podcast, if it's taken seriously, has to have moving forward, would you say?
Good question. Hmm. So again, I don't think there are absolutes. I don't think every podcast needs to make a podcast trailer. I think there are certain ones, especially these ones which are like an hour and a half, 2 hours long, in which it makes sense to do that, right? Like the way I often pitch to clients is podcast. You probably wouldn't go to the movies if you haven't seen something in advance to get an idea of what you're going to watch. There are some people which do that. Respect. I can't. Right? If I'm going to the movies, at the very least, I'm watching a trailer.
Yeah, but the
And so,
majority is lower, right? There is always an exception to the rule, but the majority of people aren't, unless they see some level of marketing towards that film.
yeah, exactly. So that is a little bit my philosophy behind podcasts as well. Is like, if we're going to get people to commit even an hour, but especially for the ones which are 2 hours plus, of their time to watch this episode, don't you think at the very least we need to warm them up to give them a bit of a feeling in advance as if what they clicked on or what they're committing to is going to pay off? And so I think that's what a trailer does. And then there's multiple aspects of like trailer also makes the guests look fantastic. It positions them as an expert or at least as an interesting person, depending upon the angle of their story, which means the guest is more likely to share it. And so I don't know. Yeah, to answer your question, I don't think there's necessarily it's not going to be a must, but it's certainly going to be kind of a minimum threshold. And the argument that a lot of the time I fall back to is you cannot do it, but you have to be mindful that the Diary of a CEO, the James Smith, the Daniel Amen, the you name it, they're all doing it. And so you're already, by choosing not to invest into that, you're already one step behind.
No, I agree, and I think as someone who does do trailers, and I'm sure we'll get onto that conversation as well, but I think for me, as we are moving more and more into interest graph based algorithms, and in a world where the whether you're service based, as in you're trying to establish an audience, establish rapport, establish trust to then potentially sell to a small number of them, or you're looking for larger numbers to then apply sponsorship and add revenue and etc. Whichever model you're looking at, the concept of having a strong hook that then tells YouTube or whatever platform you're on that this is a good piece of content will always benefit you in the long term. And I think for me, I guess it's some way, if you were going to put it into like A, B, C, D, T tier, you need to ask yourself, do you want to start at B and then work your way up? Or do you want to start at C or to start at D or whatever, or do you want to start at A? And or do you have enough resources, bandwidth, etc., etc.? Like if you're someone who's just starting out their business, they've got zero budget and they're doing all of it bootstrapped and they're doing all of it themselves. Should you have a trailer? You should have something. Yeah, right. I think. But
yeah, exactly. So, uh, as someone who had a podcast, who bootstrapped it, who didn't have any resources, I just learned how to make the trailers myself
yeah,
by the very thing that I just said of just copying to some degree what other people were doing. And that copying, yes, it might mean that it's not original content, or it feels less original, whatever. Um, but it did mean that it gave me the skills to start learning and understanding what works versus what doesn't. And yeah, you can argue that you maybe don't have the time for that. Then at some point you have to question, well, something's got to give. So you have to make choices. Um, yeah,
I agree. I think personally, for me, you need to know how to create it at least in a basic level to then be able to judge any editor that you would then bring in, right? Like, because for me, otherwise, and this is the same with any marketing, this is the same with anything you do, you should be able to do it yourself. A, because when shit hits the fan, you might have to, right?
exactly.
And B, you also are in a position where then you can judge the person you're outsourcing your ads to, you're outsourcing your marketing to, you're outsourcing your video editing to, etc. But then also, like, think about it this way: the capacity you could gain by getting someone, quote, more skilled in trailer making to come in, someone like Ryan, for example, right? And then that gives you, we were talking before that it takes you like a day, sometimes 2 days to do a trailer. Okay, cool. So you're saying to me that I can get a trailer that's 2 days worth of work for X price. Cool. Okay, so my objective then is to spend that 2 days making more than that price. That's it. That's the only objective in that respect. Unless you're truly passionate and your core is, I want to become, sorry, Brian, one of your competitors.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
I would say the better use of someone's time is actually developing their craft, and that could be an adjacent craft like getting better at production, getting better at filming, getting better at marketing, etc. And then you can bring in someone like Ryan or a specialist to then do X, Y, Z, right? But especially if you're trying to keep consistency, the reason why I live stream the show, but then also then pre-produce it, is so I can have the best of both worlds, and I can just simply have more volume and I can
Yeah.
squeeze each episode a lot more when it comes to the output. Now, it doesn't mean by any means that, by me doing that, I'm necessarily going to have larger views.
Yeah.
Is potentially the likelihood is yes, because I've got more content going out around the same topic. But actually, again, it comes back to that overarching strategy and what are you looking to do and how you're looking to do it. But I guess, in the research I did around yourself, it's actually, you said you aspire to be a Netflix documentary editor, right? I mean, how does that, I guess, there's kind of a two-part question here, which is like, number one, how does that influence your mindset if you haven't already touched on it today? But then number two, I would argue that that's I won't go as far as dying job or dying field, but it's definitely not as, I would say, or harder, you could say, like to get into or like to keep, because that industry is in transition at the moment with a lot of AI and etc.
Yeah.
In that respect. I mean, has your views kind of changed as you've had that kind of want and that core, from when you wanted that at the time?
Yeah. No, I wouldn't say it has changed. But main reason for that is more so because I tend to be the type of person that really enjoys giving themselves a goal, and until I achieve it, I I don't. Yeah, it doesn't leave my mind basically. So another example which still haunts me on the daily is that at some point I made it publicly aware that I wanted to write a book. And I wrote chapter 1, but so far I haven't gotten further than that. And that was, again, comes back to like this period in which all of a sudden I needed to make money, and that just became more important. There's definitely still the hunger in me to do that and to finish that, especially now I'm out the other side. Like the goal at the point was to write about the quarter life crisis. And as I was learning about everything that goes into that, now I'm out the other side and I kind of achieved what the intention of that podcast was. I feel like this now I have the insights to write that book. So yeah, anyway, that was sidetracking. I still have the intention to do that. But to answer the question whether or not Netflix editor leaves my mind, even though it's a dying field, not really, because of this like innate drive to be like, okay, I've said I wanted to do that. It's publicly on my LinkedIn. I'm, for example, not getting called out seems hard. Called on it, like that gives me that ambition to keep pushing for that. And I don't doubt from experience that once I achieve that, I will end up finding something else to be a new challenge within that space. In terms of like the aspect of its dying industry, AI and stuff, I think currently we're in a phase, and I personally believe that will hold on for the next 4 years at least, whereby it's not yet replacing creative editors. So yes, it's making things like, for example, to stick to podcast examples, making a multicam cut, you now have a tool, you can do it within 10-15 minutes, count in an extra half an hour to go through and check whether it's done it well. A task which used to take 3-4 hours.
Yeah.
Right? These kind of inefficiencies that were already within production anyway, it's currently replacing them, and that is phenomenal, right? But we're nowhere near yet to the point whereby I can just type into a chat GPT or something similar within the creative space what is in my head, and that it does it well. Like you have to have a very, very in-depth knowledge of prompt engineering in order to get something good to come out of AI within a creative space. And maybe people who disagree with that and I don't know, talk about whatever. I personally don't think, like, nothing original comes from it. And so I'm not worried about that yet. That being said, I've also talked about it before. That is my intention to do this for, let's say, the next 5-6 years, and continue building and kind of see how far I get, and around that time look into pivoting to something which is more offline heavy. My partner and I have always talked about setting up a retreat center, and I could imagine at that point we'll end up doing something like that, because I do believe as AI develops, as social media becomes more and more cluttered with AI garbage. I do think there is an element of people wanting to be more in person because it's the only thing that their eyes will believe, right? They can't believe anything on the internet anymore at some point. And I do think the like social validation, these things which are innate human psychological things, that we will default back to those more. And so rather get out while on top than kind of sit it out and then be at risk of staying at that point in a dying industry.
Yeah, and I use the word like loosely when I say dying, right? Like I think like many industries will pivot, will adapt, will change, and we'll see, you know, because there's a lot of speculation around like is AI actually going to get to the point where it can replace you or I or etc. Right? Maybe, maybe not. Right?
Yeah.
If you talk to the people who are quote making it, of course they're going to be like, yeah, 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 of course they
Mm.
are. Right? But in reality, are we going to get there? I don't
Yeah.
know, but it kind of, to an extent, I guess it does lead on to my next question, which was going to be you've been very fortunate to work with, I would argue, some high performing clients, right, in regard to their clearly successful in the monetary definition of the term, but and or even like health and balance and freedom and etc. Right? What would you say makes them either different or even like maybe some other examples that you've studied yourself, like when it comes to their either their work ethic, how they show up, what they do, that I guess has allowed them to rise above the quote average in that respect?
Yeah. Yeah. I think for everyone, the main thing that applies is they know one rule to be true, and that is that quantity brings quality. And so they are just unapologetic about posting in insane, and it is truly insane volumes of content, and often repeating content which is performed really well several times, and they just do that day in day out. So like I think currently for the Amen team, we're putting out like 300 pieces of content a week. um for James Smith, he himself is putting out a ginormous amount of content, whether that's his own or over Newtonic, or
Mm.
uh, now with the podcast coming back, he's putting out one a week, going to scale up to two a week. Those long form podcasts, they get cut down into at least 2 to 3 clips, which are like 3 to 10 minutes. In addition, the same one gets cut into about 5 to 6 reels, which gives you almost a day every day, something to post. And yeah, think about if you then that's currently with one episode. If you have two per week, you're doubling it. Obviously, the amount of content you have going out, like, and that's what you're competing against, right? That is what. And then people will get annoyed when they put out one post and it gets 3 likes, and they're like, "Oh, let me quit because no one cares." And I had this conversation with a friend of mine a while ago. He's trying to build a surface-based business, and he was like, "Yeah, I've put out 10 posts, and from that, I've only got, I think he said, 2 clients." And like, do you realize like the ratio of that? That is insane. That's actually really good. You put out 10 posts and you've already got 2 clients on a beta product. That's crazy.
Yep.
Like, just imagine if you 10x the amount of content, or even just like don't overdo it. Maybe just say, okay, from now on I commit to posting every single day, right? So you got 30 instead of 10. That means you're making 6 new clients a month, right? And this stuff is exponential. So the more you put out, the more it's going to grow. Like, and just kind of putting it out that way towards these people and helping them see, yes, maybe you feel like you were deserving of more. That could be. But I think you just grossly underestimate the amount of volume it takes.
Mm. Do you think? I mean, for me, that's where I think people who are learning to leverage AI, learning to leverage creative editors, creative people, and then working hard themselves are the ones who are then going to quote win. And I would count myself in that for me personally, but the reason why I say that is because I have always understood that the answer is just work. Right? There is no shortcut, there is no magic, there is no BS. You want X, Y, and Z. You want to times your revenue by X amount. You want to make however much it is. Okay, then you better work infinitely harder than you think it's going to be to hit that mark, whatever your mark is. The same in fitness, the same in podcasting, the same in everything. And the thing that I did wrong, I guess, last year was I wasn't solely focused on, I'm only going to do these pillars only, right?
Mm.
And the reason why I mention it here is because it's talking about that 1% improvement every time that you alluded to when it comes to volume.
Yeah.
And the way behind it, for those who may not know, is it comes from, well, many things, but it comes from a pottery study, which is the most used one, which is a semester was cut in half. One was only asked to basically create one pottery item, so I think it was like a pot or etc. And then the other half was given the opportunity to create as many as they possibly could. And the outcome was the ones who created the most learnt the most from the mistakes they were making as they were creating them, which in turn meant they were able to then create the better pot. When if
Yeah.
you just had one chance, you're not going to be able to. You're going to go make the chance, make the mistake, but then not be able to learn from it and then fix it in the next term. And that's
Yeah.
why for me, anyone who says, "Oh, I'm only going to post once a week," or "I'm only going to post 3 times a week," struggles because they don't have that compounding learning.
Yeah.
And yes, it is hard work. I get it, right? I do. But since daily posting for the last, I would say, 3 or 4 years, it doesn't. I then don't. This is going to sound horrible. I don't care specifically about each post. I
Yeah.
simply care about, is it going to get me from point A to point B, right? Whatever that is. I mean, I guess, is there, especially when you were early starting out, was it simply just, I'm going to create a tailor today, I'm then going to create another one tomorrow, I'm then going to create another one the following day, to
Yeah.
allow yourself to learn what didn't work?
Yeah. So not quite. Um, I so just to give people, I suppose, an accurate understanding of just how long I've been doing this. I started as a DJ publicly in 2016, right? So in a couple of weeks, that'll be 10 years ago. And so I wasn't posting at the same intensity that I do these days, but that was like my first taste of social media. I was positioning myself as a local DJ, reaching out to local clubs, making my own music, putting it online, taking press pics, putting that online, making like kind of behind the scenes vlogs. So then I started the side project, which was a let's say a platform for DJs and producers to ultimately give them more exposure, especially for beginning producers. And I posted. I mean, the channels are still up, so you can always check. But I think on that channel we posted 400 videos, which I did for a year and a half. Then came the Quarter Life Crisis, a podcast, which in a year we posted over 400 videos. Right, and then that's not including like that's just on Instagram. If we include like YouTube and the clips and all that stuff. So like at this point, I've been in the business for 10 years. I've been doing this actively for like 4.5, and just put out so much volume, at least one post a day. And that was just for my own stuff. Let's like in the past 2 years, if we include client work, we're talking like 2,000, 3,000 videos. You can't tell, like, you're coming around the corner making your 10 videos and you're like, oh, but I don't have the same results Ryan has. Yeah, what do you expect? Like, and so help me, what was your question again?
I mean, it was more around, I guess, like, is there a struggle around people simply understanding that it's just going to take them time, right? Because like when I started, there is this culture, especially at the moment, which is like instant. I want
Yeah.
Ryan's views. I want X success. I so on. In that respect. And I think for me, I've always understood for as long as I can remember that as long as I'm showing up every day,
Yeah.
focusing on how can I get each thing I'm doing to be slightly better every day, by the time I get to the quote success marker, my success will change in respect to what my definition of it is. But I guess it would just be advice around like people who are struggling or people who are saying, yeah, but Ryan, posting 3 times is hard because I've got a business to run, I've got this, I've got that, I've got a family, I've got so on. What would you say to those people?
It is hard. It is. You're right. But uh, if you want the upside of it, if you want the reward, you're needing to be willing to put in the work, and that is that is going to like This is what I find tricky because for me, the main reason why I did all of that I just explained was because for me personally, the fear of needing to go back to my 9 to 5
Mm.
as someone who is allergic to authority and being told what to do and when to do it, more importantly, like that fear was more motivating than anything I've ever felt to this point. And so, and I still fall back to that now, whereby I think if I don't know if the business is like having a month whereby revenue is declining or something, I'm like, I need to do something because I'm not going back to the
Mm.
9 to 5. And I think there's a large group of people who want the upside but do not have anything driving them. They're waiting for that motivation. And sure, I could lie now and say like, oh, just put in the work and you'll eventually get the results and it'll be as motivating. But that motivating is gonna leave. Like you have to have something that is driving you, something that you're scared of. For me, it was, and no disrespect to people who have 9 to 5s, but for me personally, that felt mediocre, and I felt like I could do better, and I didn't want to like be in that situation anymore. I was genuinely scared of it, like I was depressed, and so that has been the motivating factor for so long to ultimately go and put in the volume because it didn't like it wasn't more scary than that.
Yeah.
And so that made me come back time and time again to just put out another post, put out another post. And I get some very creative comments still from people who then hate in some way or whatever on the content that I produce or whatever. And I'm like, okay, but like I could listen to you now, or to friends or family. Like the family who was telling me, yeah, don't you think you need to get the normal job and
Mm.
stop messing around? Like until this year, my grandma thought I was just. She doesn't understand what I do. She thought I was just messing around, and she was scared for me, which is meant very well, but was not productive to what I was trying to achieve. And I saw other people do it, and I knew if they could, to some degree, I can. It doesn't have to be their level of success, but if they managed, I have to be able in some way to get a similar space of success.
Yeah.
Like I think we have a tendency to to really downplay success. So, for example, if whether marriages, this is a good example. People do talk say this all the time. They'll say 50% of marriages end in divorce, right? And while that may be factually accurate, the flip side of that is 50% of marriages are successful. And so you could choose to put yourself in a space whereby, well, 50% of marriages end in divorce, and so mine's going to end in divorce. Or you can put yourself in a position where 50% of marriages are successful, and therefore I will be successful.
Yeah.
And yeah, the risk of being some spiritual guru, I suppose, there is an element of this is mainly a mindset game. And I do know the moment I started working with a mindset coach, things also exponentially started increasing for me. So
I think. Well, I don't know the psychology off the top of my head, but it's somewhere along the lines of like we will only be able to see what's possible or what's in our surrounding area, right? There's been loads of studies that show like if you stay in your local area or you work in your local area, then you'll be limited in regards to income because of the likelihood of the ability to like make a fee, right? Me to charge you something when you look exponentially across the internet, the
yeah,
actual ceiling on what you can make is infinite as
yeah,
long as you understand that you're adding value to a different market and then you can target that market, etc. But I
yeah,
guess the thing I also wanted to mention as well, I mean, I guess in some ways, some people say to me when their content isn't performing or maybe it's like plateauing or etc. I mean, like, are they, quote, shadow banned or do they, because I've always been of the view that when that happens, you need to mix it up, you need to change things because you're getting complacent with either the system which you've built to create content, fair enough, great system, but the
yeah,
system is only as good as the results it creates. So if
yeah,
you're still making money, don't change the system, right?
exactly.
But
Yeah,
if your objective, maybe if you're in the camp that we alluded to earlier, which
yeah.
is actually we need to make more views because the sponsors are maybe unhappy with how
Mm.
X episode performed, what would you recommend, or is it just simply their quote shadow banned?
Oh, I rarely think shadow band is a thing. Maybe if you like swear a lot, or you break a lot of the community guidelines, or you're pushing a lot of like, I don't know, controversial things which don't speak in favor of the social media algorithm, right? Then I could imagine you get shadow bans. But if you don't do that, and you're just an, let's say, everyday creator, I think it is indeed. I mean, algorithms do change. We see it on LinkedIn currently. Video was a period whereby you could put any piece of garbage on LinkedIn and it would get insane numbers, and now it's barely doing anything. And so I do think that is in part to an algorithm change, but I wouldn't go as far as saying you're shadow banned. And if anything, if you are in your core a creator, that should be the challenge, right? That should be the
Yeah.
challenge for you to say, okay, I got here at some point by trying a bunch of different stuff, right? At some point, I found something which worked, and so I doubled down on that, and decided to focus on just that and do nothing else anymore. And people like fatigue, people's attention fatigue, and if you're not bringing anything new anymore, at some point they've seen your stuff over and over again, and so it gets boring, right? And so they're looking for new stuff. And so if you are a creator in your core and you find yourself in the position you're talking about, I say a good ratio to stick to, especially in the beginning, is is just 50% test content and 50% of what you think personally will most likely do well. And as you grow, you'll see certain videos do better than others, and the ratio kind of adjusts. And so you'll at some point be producing for 75% of the content that always consistently does well. But I still think you should have that 25% of content whereby you're just testing new ideas, new formats, new iterations of stuff. And sometimes it doesn't have to be extensive. Like I produce a weekly show in which I break down how edits are made, right? And so I've been doing this now again for about 2 months. And in the most recent episode that I recorded last week, I decided to add a segment in which I basically give strategic advice when it comes to content. It's like a 1 minute thing in which I basically give a strategic tip of the week. And so that show expands, right? It's gone from just me reviewing 3 videos to my strategic advice plus the 3 videos. And then the week after, I added in a color grade segment. So I take like a scene from Stranger Things and explain these are the color elements that go into creating a scene like Stranger Things. And so the show builds, and I've given myself here with 2 new segments that I can test and see how they do. So I'll put it out on socials as an individual clip. I'll also like ask in the episode what they think, which ultimately creates engagement, causes people to give feedback. And so there's this ratio that I stick to that works very well for me, at least, of constantly, continuously developing yourself and figuring out some way to stay fresh. Because otherwise, the alternative is you become boring, and in the end, that's only going to be a downhill spiral from there, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think yeah, there's kind of 2 points, I guess. A, the Alex Amodi side of it, which is like outlast everyone else who is quote unquote boring, right? So be the longest running podcast in your niche, just because you want to be the stubbornness person,
Yeah,
right? There's that, or I would say actually probably it's more and then also adding those other elements in, like those elements you kindly shared about what can we do to make the show unique. What angle can we think about it, or just think, actually, maybe I'm going to go after the guests who haven't been on shows before. Maybe I'm going to simply go after the people who are tiny, right? So they would actually really appreciate being asked. And actually, you can get more nuance, but maybe they're like seasoned professionals, right? So like they've been in the industry like 50 years, but
yeah,
they're so small in the respect to like they're not like a known marketer or a known name. So when you get an interview with them, it's like this completely brand new perspective.
yeah,
And or you then try and compete with, and I guess it comes back to your like our previous point at the very beginning, which was like, what's your like your actual reason for doing the content? Is it to make you more money, or is it to get more views, right? So if
yeah,
you're what I believe Stephen Bartlett's now looking to do, which he's like, I want to create the largest podcast in regards to numbers, period. He's going to have a very different guest plan, guest structure, guest strategy than say someone like I or maybe you have or would have. Because we're looking for strategic experts that will help us position us as experts in marketing, in video content creation, etc. Rather than him, who is looking for how much mass, I would assume, I don't know, but my assumption would be how much mass appeal is this episode going to get because how well known is X name and or how topical is the conversation which we're going to have, right? At the peak of AI, funnily enough, he did a load of stuff about AI,
Yeah. Now he's anti-AI, which is kind of funny. But what I do think the Diary of a CEO team does smartly is, I was lucky enough, I think I started listening at like episode 20, and now they're at like, I think 400 or something like that. So when I started listening, one of the main reasons I started listening was because it was about CEOs, right? And with time, as Steven developed and got more interested into, because you can look back at the first, he was definitely not lean or muscular or like he was. It was most definitely not fat or anything, or it was just, normal dude. And over time, you can tell with the people he interviewed and the learnings he was taking from them, fitness and health and all of that started becoming way more of an interest to him. And so what he did as a result of that is started speaking to these people who were also interested in health and fitness, etc. And I think he's done it very smartly, whereby he understands there's an element, what you're referencing at is like which people get massive views. So like Michelle Obama, right? That's just naturally going to be a hit. Recently Kevin Hart, that's naturally going to be a hit, right? And then there's the element of all of the like technical experts that he still interviews, which are more in relation to health and fitness. But then there was also someone, I honestly don't remember who, but there was someone more recently that he interviewed, which was relatively unknown. Like at the time, the first time he got Daniel Priestley on, at that point, I think he had like 30,000 followers, which sounds like a lot, but it's really not if you put it into context of the normal average guest of Stephen at that time. And so I think if anything, he holds exactly true for what I just said to the ratio of like testing, right? Continue that. Sure, focus on the views if that is the goal of the podcast. Keep that in mind. But like also feel free to like get the random guest on there. And that being said, the flip side of what you were already hinting at is a good strategy when it comes to content. If you're trying to become a standout name, it's just do the exact opposite of what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
And so everyone is creating a trailer with 3-hour-long episodes. Cool. You make a podcast that is maybe 10 minutes long with one core question that you discuss with a friend, for example, or maybe you just discuss it yourself, right? And you put that out every day instead of once a week, right? Or the same goes for hooks. Like everyone is starting with very controversial hooks. You start with a like colored screen and text on it, and you animate the text in with an image, and then you go into the like bulk of the trailer. Like I think if you just try the opposite of what you feel works, 9 times out of 10, I think you're going to find better results that way.
I think, in some ways I hate to say this, but a lot of marketing is science, right? You have to be creative enough to think up the ideas, sure, but you actually have to then get the data to then learn from it, right? So you might have in the same way a scientist would have a theory or a hypothesis.
Yeah.
You would go, I think this is the case. In the same when we work with clients and we're looking to try and get a client a certain objective, it's like, okay, well, in theory, we think you want to talk to this kind of person who's this demographic who lives roughly around this area. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to test that theory and see what happens.
Yeah.
I guess the crux and the thing that we use Stephen as an example, so I'll continue to use him. The thing that he does more than others is he will do exactly what we described, which was he will do the and methodology when it comes to, we know what works, we're going to continue that, so we're going to say we're going to do that every week, but then we'll have a bonus episode which is purely for testing. We don't care whether that episode is going to get 5 views, 10 views, 1 million views, or 100 million views, or whatever it is. We're purely going to do that episode just so we can understand, does this resonate with our current audience, and or do we gain a new audience from doing so?
Yeah.
And I think if you scale this really down into the majority of people who are maybe consuming this, who are maybe smaller businesses, or like, you know, 1 or 2, maybe 2, maybe up to 10 employees, if you take that same thought process, as long as you have the bandwidth and the resources to be able to do so, of course, you'll be able to, quote, outpace some of your competitors if you move quickly, because you'll be able to say, okay, cool, let's test something, let's see if it works. Okay, cool, it works. So now we can do this on top of everything else we already know works. So every time you do that, you're adding more fuel to that fire and that engine as a whole. So it's going to, or using the snowball analogy, it's going to gain more snow going down the hill, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the more compounding you have, the faster it grows, so on, so on, so on. Right.
Yeah.
But for those who have been really interested in this conversation and maybe want to check out some of your stuff, check out some of the editing show, etc., where's best for people to reach out to you?
Probably via LinkedIn. Yeah, just on my channel. Pretty sure if you type in Ryan Faber, you should find me. I also, you can find me on YouTube if you search The Quarter Creator Club if you're interested in learning more about editing or content strategy these days, and we'll be putting out a lot more content on there as well. So
fabulous. And if you were going to talk to either yourself or someone very similar to you 10 to 15 years ago, and you were going to give advice, what advice would you give that person?
Trust your gut. And listen to people who have done what you aspire to achieve. And so my whole podcast, the whole thing that got me to where I am now, and arguably I still have a long way to go, but the main philosophy of that was I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I knew there were hundreds to thousands of entrepreneurs who had made it work. I figured if I would talk to enough of them and ask them questions as to how or what they thought the frameworks were that made it, in all of those subjective experience, I should be able to find an objective line. And you don't need to start a podcast. I'm pretty sure if you send a bunch of LinkedIn DMs, if you DM me after watching this and you're like, I want advice on how to become a better editor, for example, I will respond to that. And I know for a fact, because I've done it, that there are plenty of people out there who are the same. And so if you just speak to enough of those people, at some point you'll see the patterns in what all of these people have in common, and then you know what you have to replicate.
No, absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's sometimes about not like trying to reinvent the wheel, but if you're going to take the bits that you really want to emulate and like. But thank you so much for the time, Ryan. Really appreciate it. And if you did enjoy this episode and would like to see more like it, make sure to be subscribed by clicking this button just here. And YouTube believes you enjoy this button or this video more specifically, so make sure to click that. And I'll see you very, very soon.